Imagine waking up after centuries in cryosleep to discover that humanity, once the most feared and respected warrior race in the galaxy, has been erased from history. Every record deleted. Every monument destroyed. Every memory of human courage, human sacrifice, and human defiance wiped clean from the collective consciousness of 1,000 alien civilizations. But you're still here. And, in your hands, you hold the one thing they couldn't destroy, the last battle standard of humanity, stained with the blood of heroes who died believing their sacrifice mattered. The galaxy thinks it has found peace by forgetting the warriors who gave them freedom. They're about to learn that some flames, once lit, can never truly be extinguished. And, when the darkness returns, hungrier and more merciless than before, they'll discover why the universe once whispered the name human with equal parts terror and hope. One man. One flag. One chance to remind the galaxy what it means to never surrender. The resistance begins now. Marcus Chen opened his eyes to silence. Not the peaceful quiet of sleep, but the absolute, crushing silence of a tomb. The cryogenic chambers systems hummed their final notes as ancient machinery struggled to maintain functions it hadn't performed in centuries. Ice crystals fell from his beard as he sat up, his muscles screaming protests that echoed through bones that felt like they belonged to someone else. The status display flickered with numbers that made no sense. Sleep duration, 847 years, 4 months, 12 days. Marcus stared at the readout, convinced it was malfunctioning. The last thing he remembered was the evacuation of Firebase Omega, the screaming of plasma cannons, and the weight of humanity's battle standard in his hands as he carried the wounded to the escape pods. He stumbled from the chamber, his legs barely supporting him as he made his way through the cramped corridors of what he now realized was not a military vessel, but a civilian transport converted for long-range cryogenic storage. Emergency lighting cast everything in sickly yellow shadows, and the air tasted stale with the metallic tang of recycled atmosphere that had been running far too long. The ship's computer responded to his biometric scan with a voice that cracked like old parchment. Colonel Marcus Chen, Terran Defense Force, 47th Shock Regiment. Welcome back to the living, sir. Computer, what's our status? Where are we? We are currently in orbit around Kepler Station, Vega Sector. The station has been broadcasting standard civilian traffic patterns for the past 47 years. All appears normal. Marcus found his way to the observation deck, and what he saw below made his blood turn to ice water. Kepler Station was exactly as he remembered it, a massive hub of commerce and culture where dozens of species mingled in relative peace. The same gleaming spires, the same docking arms stretched out like welcoming embraces, the same streams of traffic flowing between the station and the planets beyond. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Where once the station had been a fortress bristling with defensive platforms and patrol craft, now it sat naked in space. No military presence whatsoever. No human vessels among the thousands of ships coming and going. And, flying from every docking port and observation deck were the flags and banners of the Galactic Unity Accord, the same organization that humanity had died fighting against. Marcus activated the ship's communication array and requested docking permission, using protocols that felt like muscle memory. The response came back in perfect galactic standard, but with an accent he didn't recognize. Unknown vessel, please state your species of origin and purpose for visiting Kepler Station. Species of origin. Marcus had never heard that phrase used in official communications before. This is Colonel Marcus Chen of the Terran Defense Force, requesting emergency docking for medical assistance. A long pause. Then, I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Did you say Terran? That's correct. Human. From Earth. Another pause, longer this time. Marcus could hear muffled voices in the background, speaking in urgent whispers. Finally, sir, I'm going to need you to stand by. We're checking our records. Marcus waited, but something in the controller's voice sent alarms screaming through his mind. He activated the ship's passive scanners and began monitoring local communications. What he heard made his hands shake. Never heard of any species called human. Terran Defense Force isn't in any of our databases. Could be some kind of hoax or illegal immigrant vessel. Better contact Security Division, they'll know how to handle this. Marcus cut the communications and fired the ship's emergency thrusters, pulling away from the station as quickly as the old transport could manage. His mind raced as he tried to process what he had just heard. They didn't know what humans were. They had no records of the Terran Defense Force, no knowledge of the species that had bled and died to protect them from the Devourers. He accessed the ship's database and pulled up the historical records from before he went into cryosleep. The final battle at Firebase Omega had been humanity's last stand against the Unity Accord, the fascist government that had swept across the galaxy like a plague, conquering and enslaving every species they encountered. Humanity had fought them to a standstill, buying time for the other free worlds to organize their resistance. The last thing Marcus remembered was General Harrison's voice over the comm. "This is it, people. We hold here, we die here, but we don't let those bastards pass. Remember, today we become legends." Now, it seemed, they had become nothing at all. Marcus spent the next 3 days hiding in the shadow of a dead moon, using the ship's long-range sensors to scan the local star systems. What he found painted a picture that chilled him to the bone. The Unity Accord hadn't just won the war, they had rewritten history. Every human colony he checked was either destroyed or repurposed, populated by other species who seemed to have no memory of the previous inhabitants. Earth itself was gone. Not destroyed, but transformed beyond recognition. The continents had been reshaped, the oceans redirected, and gleaming cities of alien architecture rose where human settlements had once stood. It was as if humanity had never existed at all. But Marcus knew they had existed. And he had proof. In the transport's cargo hold, carefully preserved in a climate-controlled container, was the battle standard of the 47th Shock Regiment. 40 meters of smart fabric in deep blue and silver, stained with the blood of heroes and inscribed with the names of every battle humanity had fought in their 10-year war against the Unity Accord. More than a flag, it was a testament to sacrifice, courage, and the refusal to kneel before tyranny. Marcus spread the standard across the cargo hold floor and traced his fingers over the battle honors embroidered in threads that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Firebase Omega. The Siege of Centauri. The Miracle at Wolf 359. The Last Stand at Proxima B. Each name represented thousands of human lives spent in the cause of freedom, not just for humanity, but for every species in the galaxy. And now they were all forgotten. Marcus activated the ship's fabrication unit and began producing equipment he would need. Body armor, weapons, surveillance gear, and, most importantly, recording devices. If the galaxy had forgotten what humans were capable of, he would remind them. If history had been erased, he would write it again in fire and blood. But, first, he needed to understand his enemy. The ship's computer had maintained its connection to the Galactic Information Network, and Marcus spent hours diving through historical databases, news archives, and cultural records. What he found was a masterpiece of propaganda and revision. According to official history, the Unity Accord had brought peace to a galaxy torn apart by endless wars between primitive species. There was no mention of humanity, but Marcus could read between the lines. The Great Pacification had lasted exactly 10 years, the same duration as humanity's War of Resistance. The terrorist attacks that had plagued Unity forces were described in terms that Marcus recognized as human military tactics. Most tellingly, the Unity Accord's greatest military victory was described as the Battle of the Lost Hope, which had taken place at coordinates that Marcus knew belonged to Firebase Omega. The official records claimed that Unity forces had finally defeated the last holdouts of a mysterious rebel faction that had refused to accept the benefits of civilized government. The rebels had been described as exceptionally dangerous, using advanced technology and unconventional warfare tactics that had initially stymied Unity forces. But, in the end, civilization had triumphed over chaos, and the galaxy had entered a new age of prosperity and peace. Marcus recognized the truth hidden beneath the lies. Humanity hadn't just been defeated, they had been erased so thoroughly that even their enemies were afraid to speak their name. The Unity Accord had won not just through military might, but through the systematic destruction of memory itself. As Marcus read deeper into the records, he began to understand the scope of what had been done. Every species that had allied with humanity had had their memories altered or their leadership replaced. Every battle honor, every monument, every song of tribute had been deleted or rewritten. Children born after the war grew up in a galaxy where humanity had never existed, where the Unity Accord had always been the benevolent guardians of galactic peace. But Marcus also began to see cracks in their perfect facade. Crime rates in former human territories were 17 times higher than the galactic average. Suicide rates among species that had once been humanity's allies were climbing steadily. There were reports of mystery illnesses that caused victims to suffer from chronic depression and anxiety, symptoms that Marcus recognized as the psychological effects of having core memories suppressed or altered. Most intriguingly, there were scattered reports of individuals across dozens of species suffering from what medical authorities termed false memory syndrome, vivid dreams and hallucinations involving a bipedal species with pale skin and strange eyes who fought with impossible courage against overwhelming odds. These individuals were typically treated with memory adjustment therapy and returned to normal lives, but the reports kept appearing. The galaxy hadn't forgotten humanity completely. Deep in their subconscious minds, buried beneath layers of artificial programming, the truth was still there. Waiting. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in the cryogenic chamber stir within his chest. Not just anger, though that was certainly there. Not just grief for everything that had been lost. Hope. Dangerous, desperate hope. He carefully folded the battle standard and sealed it back in its protective container. Then, he began plotting a course for the Rigel sector, where the records indicated the highest concentration of false memory syndrome cases. If there were others out there who remembered, even in dreams and fragments, then humanity's war was not over. It was just beginning again. Marcus checked the ship's armament, a pathetic collection of civilian-grade defensive systems that wouldn't stop a determined pirate, much less a Unity patrol. But he had other weapons. He had 8 centuries of tactical knowledge, the training of Earth's finest military academies, and, most importantly, he had something the Unity Accord had tried so hard to erase, the absolute, unshakable conviction that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the odds. The computer's voice crackled over the intercom. Colonel Chen, long-range sensors are detecting Unity patrol vessels adjusting course to intercept us. Recommend immediate jump to hyperspace. Marcus strapped himself into the pilot's chair and laid his hand on the hyperspace activation control. In a few hours, he would be deep in Unity-controlled space with nothing but a half-functioning transport and the memories of a species that officially no longer existed. Computer, transmit the following message on all frequencies before we jump. The 47th Shock Regiment remembers. Marcus Chan remembers. Humanity remembers. Sir, that will certainly alert Unity forces to our presence and intentions. Marcus smiled for the first time in 8 centuries. That's the point. It's time they remembered what they tried so hard to forget. The transport disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind only the echo of a message that would soon reach every corner of the galaxy, a message that would remind 10,000 worlds of the species that had once fought for their freedom, and the one man who had returned to finish what they started. In the depths of space, the last human began his war. The transport ship Endurance dropped out of hyperspace in the Rigel sector like a ghost returning to haunt familiar grounds. Marcus spent 3 days studying the local systems from the safety of an asteroid field, watching patrol patterns and shipping lanes with the practiced eye of a soldier who had survived more ambushes than he cared to count. Rigel Prime had changed dramatically since he had last seen it. The former mining world was now a gleaming center of commerce, its surface dotted with Unity administrative complexes that rose like silver spears from landscapes that had once been scarred by human excavation equipment. But Marcus wasn't interested in the planet itself, he was interested in the ships. Every vessel that approached Rigel Prime was scanned by Unity security cordons, their crews subjected to biometric identification and mental evaluation protocols that hadn't existed during the war. Marcus recognized the signs of a population under surveillance, though the inhabitants seemed blissfully unaware of their chains. But there were anomalies. Marcus identified 7 vessels over the course of his observation that had been flagged for additional screening, their crews subjected to enhanced mental evaluation procedures that lasted hours instead of minutes. When he cross-referenced the ship registrations with his growing database of false memory syndrome cases, the pattern became clear. The Unity Accord was tracking people who remembered. Marcus waited until the next flagged vessel, a Centauri freighter called the Lucky Strike, completed its screening and departed for the outer system. He followed at a safe distance, using passive sensors and his knowledge of patrol patterns to avoid detection. The freighter captain was clearly nervous, making random course corrections and constantly checking his scanner displays. This was someone who knew he was being watched. The Lucky Strike rendezvoused with a seemingly derelict mining station on the edge of the system, hiding in the sensor shadow of a gas giant's rings. Marcus observed the meeting through his long-range scopes, watching as several other vessels, all flagged ships from his database, approached the station using routes designed to avoid Unity patrols. A resistance. Small, disorganized, and clearly terrified, but a resistance nonetheless. Marcus waited until the other ships had departed before approaching the station himself. His transport's outdated IFF codes and civilian registration had gotten him this far, but now he needed something more. He activated an old military emergency frequency that hadn't been used in centuries and transmitted a simple message: Firebase Omega sends greetings. The response came back immediately, transmitted on the same frequency with encryption protocols that made Marcus's heart race with recognition. State your unit and verification code. Marcus closed his eyes and pulled the words from memories that felt like sacred relics: 47th Shock Regiment, 3rd Battalion, verification code Alpha 77 Tango. Colonel Marcus Chen, serial number 7749 Delta Gamma. Silence stretched across the comm channel for nearly a full minute. Then, Jesus Christ. Come aboard, sir. Bay 7. The docking bay was exactly what Marcus expected: a ramshackle collection of jury-rigged equipment and salvaged components that barely qualified as functional. But the three figures waiting for him made his breath catch in his throat. A Centauri female with the ritual scars of a warrior caste, a hulking Corvaxi male whose natural armor bore the marks of combat, and, most surprisingly, a young human woman whose existence proved that his species' extinction had been greatly exaggerated. The woman stepped forward, her hand moving instinctively to a military salute before she caught herself and settled for a respectful nod. Colonel Chen? I'm Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, formerly of the 23rd Reconnaissance Division. Welcome to the Forgotten. Marcus studied her face, noting the lean muscle tone of a soldier and eyes that held far too much pain for someone who couldn't be older than 25. Lieutenant, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. What do you remember about Earth? Sarah's expression tightened, and Marcus saw her companions move closer in a gesture that spoke of shared trauma. I remember fire, sir. Cities burning. My parents pushing me into an evacuation pod while they stayed behind to buy us time. I remember the sound the orbital bombardment made when it started. Like thunder that went on forever. How old were you? 8, sir. Maybe 9. The records from my cryopod were corrupted, but Dr. Voss here, she gestured to the Centauri female, estimates I was in cold sleep for about 820 years. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Another survivor. Another witness to what the Unity Accord had tried so desperately to erase. How many others are there? The Corvaxi male, who introduced himself as Thekmore, answered in the gravelly bass typical of his species. Including you, Colonel, we have identified 47 individuals across 12 species who retain what we call true memories of the human war. Most are in hiding. Some have been recaptured by Unity forces and subjected to memory adjustment. 7 have died rather than submit to reconditioning. 47, Marcus repeated. Against how many Unity worlds? Current estimates place Unity control at approximately 15,000 inhabited systems, Dr. Voss said, her voice carrying the precise cadence of a trained scientist. Total population under Unity governance exceeds 4 trillion sentient beings. The numbers were overwhelming, but Marcus had fought against worse odds. During the siege of Centauri, his regiment had held off an entire Unity armada with nothing but asteroid-mounted railguns and pure stubbornness. The key wasn't the size of the enemy, it was finding their weakness and exploiting it with surgical precision. Tell me about the false memory syndrome cases, he said. Dr. Voss led him to a makeshift laboratory where holographic displays showed data patterns that would have impressed the research facilities on Earth. The syndrome affects individuals across dozens of species, but the symptoms are remarkably consistent. Vivid dreams involving humans, spontaneous emotional reactions to certain historical periods, and, most intriguingly, what I can only describe as phantom guilt. Phantom guilt? Subjects report feeling responsible for some terrible betrayal, though they cannot specify what or whom they betrayed. The guilt is often accompanied by episodes of inconsolable grief and a compulsive need to atone for unnamed sins. Marcus understood immediately. The galaxy hadn't forgotten humanity, they had been programmed to suppress their memories, but the emotional truth remained. Billions of sentient beings carried the subconscious knowledge that they had abandoned their greatest defenders when they needed them most. How widespread is the syndrome? Conservative estimates suggest at least 3% of the total population experiences symptoms to some degree. That's approximately 120 billion individuals. Marcus stared at the data displays, his tactical mind automatically calculating possibilities. 120 billion people with suppressed memories of humanity. 120 billion potential allies who already carried the seeds of rebellion in their subconscious minds. Lieutenant Martinez approached with a data pad containing what appeared to be strategic assessments. "Sir, we've been monitoring Unity communications, and there's something you need to know. Your message, the one you broadcast when you left Kepler Station, it's caused quite a stir." Marcus reviewed the intercepted communications and felt a grim satisfaction at what he read. Unity Security Division had raised the threat level across 17 sectors and deployed additional patrol squadrons to hunt for what they termed the phantom transmission. More importantly, the message had triggered a 40% increase in false memory syndrome cases galaxy-wide. People were starting to remember. "What's our current operational capability?" Marcus asked. Thekmore activated a holographic display showing their pathetic collection of resources. 3 converted civilian vessels, basic fabrication equipment, and a handful of small arms that wouldn't have impressed a colonial militia unit. But Marcus had learned long ago that wars weren't won by superior firepower, they were won by superior will. "It's not about what we have," Marcus said. "It's about what they think we have. The Unity Accord's greatest weapon isn't their fleet or their surveillance network, it's the belief that resistance is hopeless. But they've made a critical error." He gestured to the data displays showing false memory syndrome statistics. They left the guilt intact. Every person in Unity space carries the subconscious knowledge that they failed to help humanity when it mattered most. That guilt is eating them alive, and they don't even understand why. Dr. Voss leaned forward, her scarred features intense with interest. "You're suggesting we can weaponize their suppressed memories?" "I'm suggesting we give them permission to remember. To feel what they already know in their hearts, that they were part of something greater once, and that they traded it away for the illusion of safety." Marcus began outlining a plan that was so audacious it bordered on insanity. Instead of trying to fight Unity's military forces directly, they would target the psychological infrastructure that held their empire together. They would remind the galaxy of what it had chosen to forget, not through force of arms, but through the simple, devastating truth. "We're going to conduct memory raids," he explained. Small teams infiltrating Unity worlds and using targeted transmissions to trigger suppressed memories in false memory syndrome sufferers. Not trying to convert them to our cause, but simply allowing them to remember what they already know. Sarah studied the tactical projections with the practiced eye of a reconnaissance specialist. "Sir, the risk of civilian casualties could be enormous. If we trigger mass psychological episodes, the casualties are already happening," Marcus interrupted, pulling up suicide statistics and mental health data from Unity worlds. "They're just happening slowly, one broken mind at a time. We're not going to hurt these people, we're going to heal them by giving them back their truth." Over the following days, Marcus worked with his small team to develop the technology and tactics they would need. Dr. Voss created what she called memory resonance transmitters, devices that could broadcast specific electromagnetic frequencies designed to disrupt the neural conditioning that suppressed human-related memories. Lieutenant Martinez mapped Unity patrol patterns and identified optimal insertion points for covert operations. Thekmore used his connections in the criminal underground to acquire additional equipment and recruit sympathetic individuals. But Marcus knew that technology and tactics would only take them so far. What they really needed was a symbol, something that would instantly communicate to awakening minds that their suppressed memories were not delusions, but fragments of a greater truth. He retrieved the battle standard from the Endurance and spread it across the station's main deck. Even in the dim lighting of the makeshift base, the smart fabric seemed to glow with an inner fire, the battle honors and names of the fallen standing out like beacons of defiance. "This is what we're really fighting for," he told his team. "Not revenge against the Unity Accord, not the restoration of human civilization, but the right of every sentient being to remember their own truth. To know who they really are and what they've accomplished." Dr. Voss approached the standard with the reverence of someone examining a sacred relic. "Marcus, the psychological impact of this symbol on awakening minds could be profound. For many species, this flag represents the greatest example of self-sacrifice they've ever witnessed. Then, it's time to let them see it again." Marcus folded the standard carefully and sealed it in a portable container designed to preserve its integrity during transport. Their first mission would be to Arcturus Station, a major Unity administrative center where false memory syndrome cases had increased by 300% in the past month. As the small fleet of converted civilian vessels prepared to depart, Marcus stood in the observation deck of the mining station and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, billions of suppressed minds were struggling against the lies that had been force-fed to them for centuries. They were waiting, whether they knew it or not, for someone to give them permission to remember. The second phase of humanity's war was about to begin. And, this time, they wouldn't be fighting alone. The ships engaged their hyperspace drives and disappeared into the darkness, carrying with them the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy, the truth. Arcturus Station hung in space like a jewel of oppression, its gleaming spires reflecting the light of twin stars while concealing the darkest secrets of the Unity Accord. Marcus observed the station through the scope of a stolen mining probe, cataloging defensive positions and patrol routes with the methodical patience of a hunter. The station was larger than he remembered. Unity expansion had transformed what had once been a modest trading post into a massive administrative complex housing nearly 3 million beings. The perfect target for their first memory raid, but also the most dangerous. Security was tight, with Unity patrol craft maintaining constant sweeps of the surrounding space and automated defense platforms tracking every piece of debris larger than a coffee cup. "Insertion Point Alpha is compromised," Lieutenant Martinez reported from the probe control station they had established aboard a disguised cargo hauler. "They've moved a defensive platform into the asteroid field we plan to use for cover." Marcus nodded, already adjusting their approach vector. "Then, we use Insertion Point Beta. Dr. Voss, what's the status on our memory resonance transmitters?" The Centauri scientist looked up from her equipment with an expression that mixed excitement with apprehension. "The transmitters are functional, but, Marcus, I must emphasize that we're operating in completely uncharted territory. We have no idea what the psychological effects might be on individuals whose memories have been suppressed for centuries." Thekmore's gravelly voice rumbled from the communications station. "My contacts on the station report that false memory syndrome cases have tripled in the past 2 weeks. The medical facilities are overwhelmed with patients suffering from what Unity doctors are calling acute nostalgia disorder." Acute nostalgia disorder. Marcus almost smiled at the clinical terminology Unity bureaucrats used to describe the awakening of suppressed memories. They couldn't even bring themselves to acknowledge what was really happening, that their perfect society was built on a foundation of lies so fragile that a single message broadcast across space was enough to crack it. Sarah pulled up holographic displays showing the station's internal layout, cross-referenced with locations where false memory syndrome cases were concentrated. "Sir, the highest concentration of cases is in residential Sector 7, mostly Corvaxi, Centauri, and hegemony species who would have been old enough to remember the war. But, we're also seeing cases in the education sectors among individuals too young to have personal memories." Genetic memory, Dr. Voss explained. Some species retain traumatic experiences in their genetic code and pass them to subsequent generations. The memory suppression techniques may have affected conscious recall, but they couldn't erase information encoded at the cellular level. Marcus studied the tactical situation with growing respect for his enemy. The Unity Accord hadn't just conquered the galaxy through military might, they had waged a war against memory itself, and they had nearly won. But nearly wasn't good enough, and the cracks in their perfect facade were growing wider every day. "We go in tonight," he decided. 3-team insertion. Sarah takes Alpha Team to the residential sectors and begins targeted transmissions. Thekmore leads Beta Team to the communications hub to establish a relay point for galaxy-wide broadcast. I'll take Gamma Team to the administrative center. Sir, what's the primary objective for Gamma Team? Sarah asked. Marcus reached into his equipment pack and withdrew the portable container holding humanity's battle standard. We're going to give them something to remember. The infiltration began at 0300 station time, when security shifts were changing and automated systems were cycling through routine maintenance protocols. Marcus and his team approached in a modified maintenance pod that barely qualified as spaceflight capable, its hull plating salvaged from a dozen different sources and its life support systems held together by determination and spare parts. The pod docked at a waste disposal port in the station's lower levels, exactly as Thekmore's criminal contacts had promised. Marcus led Dr. Voss and 2 Korvaxi volunteers through service tunnels that hadn't seen maintenance in decades, navigating by memory of station schematics that were probably outdated but, hopefully still accurate enough to get them where they needed to go. The administrative center was a temple to Unity Authority, its halls lined with propaganda displays showing happy citizens living in perfect harmony under the benevolent guidance of the Accord. But Marcus could see the fear beneath the facade. Security checkpoints every 50 meters, surveillance cameras tracking every movement, and the dead-eyed stare of guards who had been conditioned to view their own people as potential threats. Genetic memory resonance is strong here, Dr. Voss whispered as they crept through a maintenance shaft above the main administrative floor. I'm reading elevated stress hormones and neural activity consistent with suppressed trauma responses from at least 60% of the individuals below us. Marcus peered through a ventilation grate at the scene below. Dozens of Unity bureaucrats worked at their stations, processing the endless paperwork required to maintain control over 15,000 worlds. But their movements were mechanical, lifeless, and he could see the telltale signs of psychological conditioning in their behavior. These weren't administrators, they were prisoners who had forgotten they were in chains. Begin the first phase, he ordered. Dr. Voss activated her memory resonance transmitter, sending carefully calibrated electromagnetic pulses through the station's infrastructure. The effects were immediate and dramatic. Several of the bureaucrats stopped working and stared into space with expressions of confusion and dawning recognition. Others began to weep for reasons they couldn't explain. A few collapsed at their desks as suppressed memories crashed through their conditioning like a dam bursting. But it was what happened next that proved the effectiveness of their approach. Instead of chaos and panic, Marcus observed something he hadn't expected: connection. The affected bureaucrats began reaching out to each other, sharing their confusion and offering comfort. Even without understanding what was happening to them, they recognized the shared nature of their experience. Phase 2, Marcus whispered. He opened the portable container and carefully unfolded humanity's battle standard. Even in the cramped confines of the maintenance shaft, the smart fabric seemed to fill the space with presence. Dr. Voss programmed her transmitter to broadcast a holographic projection of the standard throughout the administrative center, accompanied by audio recordings of the human war anthem that had once rallied a galaxy to defiance. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every person in the administrative center stopped what they were doing and stared at the projection with expressions of recognition so profound it was almost religious. Several fell to their knees. Others began to sing along with the anthem in voices cracked with tears they didn't understand. One elderly hegemony official stood up from his desk and spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the sudden silence. I remember now. They stood at Firebase Omega. They stood and they died for us. And we let them be forgotten. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since awakening from cryosleep: pride. Not in his own actions, but in the courage of ordinary people who were choosing to remember despite the psychological pain it caused them. These bureaucrats, these supposedly loyal Unity citizens, were risking their careers, their freedom, and possibly their lives to acknowledge a truth their government had tried to bury. But their success triggered immediate consequences. Unity security forces were converging on the administrative center, their boots echoing through the corridors like approaching thunder. Marcus folded the standard and sealed it back in its container while Dr. Voss gathered her equipment. Sir, we need to go, one of the Korvaxi volunteers urged. Security will flood this area in less than 2 minutes. Marcus took one last look at the scene below. The bureaucrats were being herded into detention areas by Unity guards, but their faces showed no fear. If anything, they appeared relieved, as if a weight they hadn't even known they were carrying had been lifted from their shoulders. The extraction was harrowing. Unity security had sealed the maintenance shafts and were conducting systematic sweeps of every compartment. Marcus's team was forced to take increasingly desperate routes through the station's infrastructure, at one point crawling through a coolant recycling system that filled their suits with toxic vapors. They reached the waste disposal port just as Unity forces discovered their entry point. Blaster fire echoed through the corridors as the maintenance pod detached from the station and limped toward their rendezvous coordinates. Marcus watched through the pod's rear cameras as Unity patrol craft launched in pursuit, their formation perfect and their intent deadly. "This is Alpha Team," Sarah's voice crackled over the comm. "We have successfully completed memory transmission in Residential Sector 7. Approximately 4,000 individuals affected. But, sir, Unity forces are mobilizing throughout the station. They know what we're doing." Beta Team reporting successful infiltration of Communications Hub, Thekmore added. "Relay equipment installed and broadcasting. The galaxy-wide network is receiving our transmissions, but Unity is attempting to jam the signals." Marcus monitored the tactical display as Unity patrol craft closed the distance to their escape pod. The old maintenance vessel was no match for military interceptors, and their pursuers were closing fast. But he had learned long ago that sometimes the best tactical decision was the one that looked like suicide. "All teams, initiate emergency scatter protocol," he ordered. "Dr. Voss, transmit everything we have on the galaxy-wide network. Full spectrum broadcast, maximum power." "Marcus, that will drain our power cells and leave us defenseless," Dr. Voss protested. "Do it." The memory resonance transmitters discharged their full output in a single coordinated burst that reached across dozens of star systems. The electromagnetic pulse was so powerful it temporarily disrupted Unity communications throughout the sector, and Marcus could only imagine the chaos that was erupting across 100 worlds as suppressed memories burst through 8 centuries of conditioning. Their escape pod went dark as the power cells drained, leaving them drifting helplessly as Unity patrol craft surrounded them. Marcus waited for the inevitable capture, but instead heard Thekmore's voice over a backup comm system. "Sir, you need to see this." Marcus activated a portable display and watched in amazement as civilian vessels throughout the Arcturus system began moving toward their position. Not military ships, but cargo haulers, passenger transports, and mining vessels whose crews had apparently decided that protecting the people who had given them back their memories was worth risking everything. The Unity patrol craft found themselves facing not a helpless maintenance pod, but a fleet of improvised defenders whose only common characteristic was their determination to prevent another betrayal. Some of the civilian vessels were armed with nothing more than mining lasers and industrial equipment, but they formed a protective formation around Marcus's team with the precision of trained military units. Unity commanders, faced with the prospect of firing on their own citizens, hesitated just long enough for the civilian fleet to escort the escape pod to hyperspace. As they jumped to safety, Marcus received a message on the emergency frequency that made his heart race with possibilities. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the merchant vessel Remembrance. Colonel Chen, we haven't forgotten what your people did for us. We won't let you fight alone again." Captain Vasquez was human. Another survivor, awakened by the memory transmissions and ready to take up the fight that had seemed lost so many centuries ago. As the makeshift fleet disappeared into hyperspace, Marcus realized that their mission had accomplished far more than they had hoped. They hadn't just reminded people of humanity's sacrifice, they had proven that ordinary citizens could choose courage over comfort, truth over security, and defiance over submission. The Unity Accord's greatest fear was becoming reality. The galaxy was starting to remember what it meant to be free. And, across thousands of star systems, suppressed memories were breaking through artificial barriers like flowers pushing through concrete, bringing with them the knowledge that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The hidden base in the Veil Nebula had grown from a single abandoned mining station into a sprawling complex of interconnected habitats, weapon platforms, and communication arrays. In the 3 months since the Arcturus raid, Marcus had watched their movement evolve from a handful of desperate survivors into something that resembled a genuine military force. Captain Elena Vasquez stood beside him in the command center, reviewing tactical displays that showed the scope of their expanding network. Where once they had tracked 47 individuals with intact memories, they now coordinated with over 15,000 active resistance cells across 1,200 worlds. The Unity response has been predictable, Elena reported, her voice carrying the crisp authority of a born officer. Mass arrests of false memory syndrome sufferers, increased surveillance in residential sectors, and mandatory psychological conditioning for anyone showing signs of historical delusion. Marcus studied the reports flowing in from their network of spies and sympathizers. The Unity Accord's iron grip was tightening, but, like a fist closing around water, the harder they squeezed, the more their control leaked through their fingers. Each act of oppression created more resistance, each arrested citizen became a martyr whose fate reminded others what they were fighting against. Dr. Voss approached with data tablets containing intelligence that made Marcus's blood run cold. Marcus, we've intercepted Unity communications regarding something called Project Amnesia. It appears to be a massive expansion of their memory suppression technology. Marcus reviewed the stolen documents with growing alarm. Project Amnesia was designed to do more than suppress memories of humanity, it would completely rewrite the psychological foundations of every sentient species in the galaxy, creating populations that were incapable of independent thought or resistance to Unity authority. They're planning to lobotomize the entire galaxy, Elena breathed, reading over his shoulder. Worse than that, Dr. Voss corrected. They're planning to make lobotomy unnecessary. This technology would create individuals who genuinely believe that Unity control is not only natural but desirable. Perfect slaves who love their chains. Thekmore's massive frame filled the command center doorway as he delivered his own disturbing intelligence. My sources in Unity security report that the project has already begun field testing on isolated colonies. 3 worlds in the Outer Rim have gone completely silent. No communications, no shipping, nothing. Marcus pulled up stellar charts showing the affected systems. All were former human colonies, sparsely populated and far from major trade routes. Perfect testing grounds for technology that would reshape the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. How long before they're ready for widespread deployment? Marcus asked. Conservative estimates suggest 6 months for the primary network worlds, 18 months for complete galactic coverage, Dr. Voss replied. But, Marcus, if they succeed with Project Amnesia, it won't matter how many people remember the truth. They'll willingly forget it again. The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. All their victories, all the awakened memories and rekindled resistance would mean nothing if Unity succeeded in making rebellion psychologically impossible. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez entered the command center with a team of newly awakened humans, refugees from cryogenic storage facilities across the galaxy. Marcus had been amazed to learn how many of his people had survived the war by fleeing to the furthest reaches of space, but the joy of reunion was tempered by the desperate nature of their situation. Sir, the fleet commanders are requesting strategic briefings, Sarah reported. We now have 47 vessels under our direct command and coordination agreements with over 200 civilian ships. The question everyone's asking is, what's our next move? Marcus looked around the command center at the faces of his allies, humans who had awakened from cryosleep to find their species extinct, aliens who had recovered memories of human sacrifice, and ordinary citizens who had chosen to risk everything for the chance to be free. They were looking to him for answers he wasn't sure he had. Show me the fleet composition, he said. The holographic displays revealed a force that was impressive in numbers but pitifully equipped for the task ahead. Most of their vessels were converted civilian craft with improvised weapons and armor. They had exactly 3 genuine military vessels, a Corvaxi destroyer, a hegemony cruiser, and a human corvette that had somehow survived 8 centuries in a deep space cache. Against them stood the Unity Accord's vast military machine, thousands of modern warships, orbital defense platforms protecting every major world, and the industrial capacity to replace losses faster than any rebel force could inflict them. In a conventional war, the resistance would be swept aside in a matter of weeks. But Marcus had never planned to fight a conventional war. We're not going to try to match Unity's military strength, he announced. We're going to make their strength irrelevant. Dr. Voss, what would happen if we could disrupt Project Amnesia during its deployment phase? The Centauri scientist activated her analysis protocols, running calculations that made the display screens flicker with complex equations. If we could introduce a destabilizing frequency into their neural conditioning network during active deployment, the psychological backlash could be catastrophic for Unity forces. Not just failure of the conditioning, but complete reversal. Subjects would remember not only their suppressed memories but also the process of having them suppressed. Meaning? Meaning they would realize that the Unity Accord has been systematically erasing their minds for centuries. The anger alone might be enough to trigger galaxy-wide rebellion. Marcus felt the familiar surge of tactical inspiration that had once made him one of humanity's most effective commanders. The plan forming in his mind was audacious to the point of insanity, but it was also their only real chance of victory. "We're going to let them deploy Project Amnesia," he said. "And then, we're going to turn it into the biggest recruitment tool in galactic history." The briefing that followed was unlike anything Marcus had conducted during the war against Unity. Instead of seasoned military professionals, his audience consisted of shop clerks and cargo pilots, scientists and engineers, retired teachers and young students who had never seen combat. But they listened with the intensity of people who understood that their freedom and their sanity depended on the success of this operation. The Unity Accord's greatest weakness is their dependence on central control, Marcus explained. Project Amnesia requires constant coordination between thousands of conditioning stations across the galaxy. If we can infiltrate their command network and introduce Dr. Voss's destabilizing frequency at the moment of deployment, we can turn their weapon against them. Captain Vasquez raised the obvious tactical concern. "Sir, the Unity command network is protected by the strongest security systems in known space. It would take a miracle to even get close to their primary control facility." "Then, it's fortunate that we have something Unity doesn't expect," Marcus replied, gesturing to the portable container that held humanity's battle standard. "We have a symbol powerful enough to wake the dead." The plan that emerged from 3 days of intensive planning sessions was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its requirements. They would use their network of awakened memories to identify individuals with access to Unity's most secure facilities, not security personnel or military officers, but janitors, maintenance workers, and low-level administrators whose clearances were real but whose loyalty was assumed rather than tested. These infiltrators would plant Dr. Voss's destabilizing transmitters throughout Unity's command network while Marcus and a small team of volunteers conducted the most dangerous part of the operation, a direct assault on Unity's primary command facility to deploy humanity's battle standard at the moment of Project Amnesia's activation. "Sir, the odds of success are approximately 7,000 to 1 against," Thekmore reported after running tactical simulations. "Those are better odds than we had at Firebase Omega," Marcus replied. "And we held that position for 3 days against impossible odds." Sarah approached him after the briefing with a concern that had been troubling many of the human survivors. "Colonel, there are over 800 humans in our forces now. If we succeed in awakening the galaxy, they're going to want to know what happened to Earth. They're going to want to go home." Marcus had been dreading this conversation since the first human refugees had joined their cause. Earth was gone, not destroyed, but transformed beyond recognition by centuries of Unity terraforming. The world that had given birth to humanity existed now only in memories and dreams. "When this is over," he said carefully, "we'll find a new home. Maybe several homes. But first, we finish what we started 800 years ago." The preparations took 6 weeks, with resistance cells across the galaxy working to position infiltrators and equipment while Unity forces intensified their hunt for the rebels. Marcus watched intelligence reports flow in from across known space, tracking the gradual deployment of Project Amnesia's infrastructure with the methodical patience of a hunter waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Unity was taking no chances with their final solution. The deployment was being coordinated from Nexus Prime, the most heavily defended facility in their empire. Located at the gravitational center of the galaxy's most populated sector, Nexus Prime was protected by 3 fleet groups, orbital battle stations, and security protocols that had never been penetrated in 7 centuries of Unity rule. It was also where Unity kept their most sacred relics, trophies taken from conquered civilizations to demonstrate the futility of resistance. Marcus had no doubt that somewhere in Nexus Prime's vaults were artifacts from humanity's final battles, possibly including battle standards from other regiments that had made their last stand at Firebase Omega. On the day Project Amnesia was scheduled to begin deployment, Marcus stood in the hangar bay of their command ship, watching as volunteers made final preparations for what everyone understood might be a suicide mission. The assault force consisted of 23 individuals from 12 different species, united by nothing more than their refusal to let Unity erase what it meant to be free. Captain Vasquez approached with the tactical reports from their infiltration teams.
All teams report successful placement of destabilization transmitters. DR. VASA's frequency generators are in position throughout Unity's command network.
When you give the signal, we can disrupt Project Amnesia across 17,000 worlds simultaneously. Marcus nodded, then unsealed the portable container holding humanity's battle standard. For the last time, he carefully unfolded the smart fabric and examined the battle honors and names of the fallen that covered its surface. Soon, he would either add his own name to that honored roll or complete the mission that had cost so many lives to begin.
Let's go remind the galaxy what humans died for, he said.
The assault force launched in a single converted cargo vessel, its holds packed with equipment and its crew committed to a plan that required them to fight their way to the heart of Unity's power and plant their flag in the most secure facility in known space.
Behind them, the resistance fleet prepared for the chaos that would follow.
If Marcus succeeded, the galaxy would awaken to 8 centuries of suppressed rage. If he failed, the Unity Accord would finally achieve the perfect order they had always sought.
Either way, the age of forgetting was about to end.
Nexus Prime loomed before them like a metallic mountain suspended in the void, its surface bristling with defensive weapons that could incinerate entire fleets. Marcus watched the massive station grow larger on their approach screens while Unity patrol craft swept the surrounding space in patterns that had remained unchanged for centuries. The converted cargo hauler final stand crept through the outer security perimeter using forged shipping credentials and a hull full of legitimate cargo that concealed their true purpose. Marcus had learned during the war that the best way to infiltrate an impregnable fortress was to walk through the front door with a smile and the proper paperwork. Nexus Control, this is Cargo Hauler Final Stand requesting docking clearance for scheduled delivery to Administrative Sector 12, Captain Vasquez transmitted, her voice perfectly steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting.
Final stand you are cleared for docking Base 77 Alpha.
Maintain approach vector and prepare for standard security screening. Marcus reviewed the station schematics one final time while his assault team made final equipment checks. Nexus Prime was a city in space, housing nearly 50 million beings in a complex that stretched for thousands of kilometers. At its heart lay the Central Command Authority, where Unity's most senior leaders coordinated the administration of 15,000 worlds. And, somewhere within that labyrinthine complex was the Project Amnesia Control Center, where the signal would originate that would either enslave every mind in the galaxy or trigger the greatest rebellion in galactic history.
The docking procedure was routine, almost boringly normal.
Unity had grown so confident in their control that even their most secure facility operated with the casual efficiency of a commercial spaceport. Security scanners examined their cargo manifests while board inspectors conducted cursory examinations of containers that held enough weapons and explosives to level several city blocks. Inspection complete, the Unity Customs official announced, not bothering to look up from his datapad. Delivery authorization granted for Administrative Sector 12. Report to Cargo Control upon completion of your delivery schedule. Marcus and his team disembarked with the practiced movements of legitimate cargo handlers, their military-grade equipment concealed within shipping containers marked as industrial machinery. They had 8 hours before their ship was scheduled to depart, 8 hours to penetrate the most secure facility in known space, disable Project Amnesia, and plant humanity's battle standard where the entire galaxy could see it. Dr. Voss activated her portable scanner as they moved through the station's corridors, tracking the electromagnetic signatures that would lead them to Project Amnesia's control systems. The neural conditioning network is more extensive than our intelligence suggested, she reported quietly.
They're not just targeting conscious memory suppression, they're attempting to rewrite fundamental personality structures.
The readings confirmed Marcus's worst fears.
Unity wasn't content with erasing memories of humanity's sacrifice.
They intended to eliminate the psychological capacity for self-sacrifice itself, creating populations that would be literally incapable of putting principles before personal safety.
Thekmore consulted the station directory with the calm professionalism of someone conducting legitimate business.
Central Command Authority is located in Sector 1 Alpha, Maximum Security Zone.
Access requires Class 7 clearance and biometric verification.
Then, we'll have to make our own access, Marcus replied, leading his team toward the maintenance shafts that honeycombed the station's interior. The infiltration route took them through service tunnels that were thankfully similar to those on every major space station, cramped, poorly lit, and generally ignored by security forces who assumed that anyone desperate enough to crawl through waste recycling systems was probably not a significant threat. They emerged in a storage facility 3 levels below the Central Command Authority, where Marcus activated the first phase of their assault. Sarah and her reconnaissance team began planting charges designed to create diversions throughout the station while Dr. Voss prepared her frequency generators to interface with Unity's command systems. Marcus, Dr. Voss said, studying readings from her scanner, the Project Amnesia deployment is beginning ahead of schedule. I'm detecting neural conditioning signals targeting populations in the Outer Rim sectors. Marcus felt his heart race as he realized their timeline had just compressed dramatically. Unity was moving faster than anticipated, which meant they had minutes rather than hours to complete their mission. All teams, execute immediately, he ordered. Sarah, begin diversions now. Dr. Voss, start the frequency interference as soon as you have network access. Everyone else, follow me. The assault on Central Command began with explosions that rocked the station's lower levels, triggering emergency protocols that sent Unity security forces racing toward what they assumed were the real threats. Marcus led his remaining team through emergency access shafts that brought them directly into the heart of Unity's power. The Central Command Authority was a cathedral of oppression, its vast chambers filled with monitoring stations where Unity officials tracked the thoughts and actions of trillions of sentient beings. Holographic displays showed the steady progress of Project Amnesia deployment across dozens of star systems, with green indicators marking populations that had been successfully conditioned. But Marcus also saw something that filled him with savage satisfaction: scattered red warnings throughout the displays, indicating system failures and communication disruptions where their infiltration teams had successfully planted Dr. Voss's destabilization transmitters. Unity security forces were responding to the diversions exactly as Marcus had predicted, leaving Central Command protected by automated defenses and a skeleton crew of technicians who had never expected to face a direct assault. Marcus and his team cut through them with the ruthless efficiency of soldiers who understood that failure meant not just death, but the death of freedom itself. The Project Amnesia Control Center was a gleaming chamber lined with quantum processors that hummed with the power to reshape minds across the galaxy. Marcus watched the deployment status displays with growing urgency as more systems came online and began broadcasting neural conditioning signals to unsuspecting populations. Dr. Voss, how long until you can reverse the signal? He called over the sound of continuing explosions from the diversions. 2 minutes to establish interface, then another 3 minutes to upload the destabilization frequency, she replied, her hands moving frantically across control interfaces that were designed to be operated by Unity technicians. 2 minutes they didn't have. Unity security forces had realized that the explosions were diversions and were converging on Central Command with overwhelming force. Marcus could hear the sound of blast doors sealing and security lockdowns activating throughout the station. Sir, we have maybe 90 seconds before they breach the access points, Sarah reported, her voice tight with controlled tension. Marcus made the decision that would define the rest of galactic history. Instead of waiting for Dr. Voss to complete her interface, he opened the portable container that held humanity's battle standard and began unfolding the smart fabric in the center of the control room. The moment the standard was fully deployed, something extraordinary happened. The quantum processors that controlled Project Amnesia began resonating with harmonics that Dr. Voss's equipment had never been programmed to generate. The battle honors embroidered in the fabric threads created from materials salvaged from human battlefields were interacting with Unity's neural conditioning network in ways that defied scientific explanation. Marcus, the standard is interfacing directly with their systems, Dr. Voss reported in amazement. The quantum resonance patterns are somehow compatible with the neural conditioning frequencies. It's as if the flag itself remembers what it's supposed to do. The tactical displays throughout Central Command began showing something that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. Across hundreds of worlds where Project Amnesia deployment had begun, the conditioning signals were reversing. Instead of suppressing memories, they were amplifying them. Instead of creating compliant subjects, they were awakening populations to 8 centuries of suppressed rage. On world after world, green status indicators flickered and turned red as Unity control collapsed under the weight of returning memories. Populations that had been conditioned to love their chains were suddenly remembering what freedom had cost and who had paid the price for it. Unity security forces breached the control room just as the cascade failure reached the core worlds. Marcus positioned himself between the battle standard and the armed guards who poured through the access points, determined to protect the symbol that was saving the galaxy even if it cost him his life. But the Unity guards had stopped firing. They stood in the doorway with their weapons lowered, staring at the battle standard with expressions of recognition and growing horror as their own suppressed memories began to surface. One of the guards, a young hegemony male whose conditioning had been particularly thorough, dropped his weapon entirely and fell to his knees. "They stood for us," he whispered, his voice breaking with the weight of recovered memory. "The humans stood and died for us, and we let them be forgotten." The psychological cascade spread throughout Nexus Prime as the standard's resonance effect reached every mind on the station. Unity technicians abandoned their posts as they remembered what they had helped to destroy. Security forces turned their weapons against the systems they had been programmed to protect. Administrative officials who had spent centuries implementing Unity control protocols began systematically dismantling their own authority structures. Marcus watched the tactical displays as the rebellion spread faster than Unity forces could respond. The core worlds were erupting in coordinated uprisings as populations remembered not just humanity's sacrifice, but their own betrayal of the species that had died defending them. The guilt and rage that had been suppressed for centuries erupted with volcanic fury, sweeping away Unity authority like a tsunami of awakened conscience. Captain Vasquez's voice crackled over Marcus's communicator. "Sir, we're receiving surrender transmissions from Unity military commanders across 17 sectors. They're not trying to stop the uprisings, they're joining them." Dr. Voss monitoring readings from her equipment with scientific fascination. "Marcus, the resonance cascade is self-sustaining now. The standard has created a permanent alteration in the galactic consciousness matrix. Unity's memory suppression technology has been permanently reversed." Marcus looked around the control room at Unity personnel who were now working frantically to dismantle Project Amnesia and restore suppressed historical records. The same people who had been preparing to lobotomize the galaxy were now racing to repair the damage their regime had inflicted on trillions of minds. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez approached with reports that made Marcus realize the scope of what they had accomplished. "Sir, we're receiving communications from human survivor groups across the galaxy. The resonance effect has awakened cryogenic facilities we never knew existed. Current estimates suggest over 2 million humans survived the war in various forms of suspended animation. 2 million humans. Not enough to restore their original civilization, but more than enough to ensure that humanity would never again face extinction." Marcus felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he had been carrying, the crushing responsibility of being the last guardian of his species' memory. But, more important than humanity's survival was what had happened to the galaxy itself. As Marcus watched the status displays, he saw world after world throwing off Unity control and establishing new governments based on the principles that humans had died defending. Freedom of thought. The right to remember. The courage to sacrifice for others. Thekmore approached with a message that had just arrived on the emergency military frequency. "Sir, this is from Admiral Chen of the newly reconstituted Galactic Defense Force." Admiral Chen. Marcus smiled at the coincidence of names before reading the message. It was an invitation to assume command of humanity's contingent in a new galactic alliance, one founded on the principle that no species would ever again be allowed to erase another from history. Marcus folded humanity's battle standard carefully, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what they had accomplished. The fabric that had once been stained with the blood of heroes was now clean, its purpose finally fulfilled. The standard had served not just as a symbol of human sacrifice, but as the key to unlocking the suppressed conscience of an entire galaxy. "What are your orders, sir?" Sarah asked. Marcus looked around the control room where Unity's greatest weapon had been turned into the instrument of their downfall. Across the galaxy, trillions of beings were experiencing freedom for the first time in centuries, remembering what it meant to choose principle over safety and truth over comfort.
Signal the fleet, he said. It's time to go home. All of us.
As the final stand departed Nexus Prime, Marcus stood in the observation deck and watched the station that had once been the symbol of Unity oppression transform into something new. Ships from across the galaxy were arriving to participate in the establishment of a new galactic government, one that would be founded on the memories that Unity had tried so hard to erase.
The last standard of humanity had served its purpose.
The galaxy was free to remember, free to choose, and free to honor the sacrifice of those who had refused to let tyranny triumph. In the end, that was all any soldier could ask for, that their sacrifice mattered, that it was remembered, and that it made the universe a better place for those who came after. The war was finally over.
The resistance had won.